Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. A warm welcome to all of you. My name is Swati Khadye, and I'm your host for today's virtual session. I'm heading IT, Digital and Operations for Mahindra Insurance Brokers. And in my last 2 decades of experience, I have worked on lots of technology initiatives for a private sector bank as well as for the payment bank. Today, on behalf of Mahindra Insurance Brokers, we bring you a virtual session on how to secure your business against the cyber risk. In today's world, every business is going digital and making its product systems available on the internet. We as people are storing lots of our data, which is sensitive and about our personal data on the computers and internet linked devices. So it is very important for us to understand what are the risks associated with and how we should protect our assets. So today we have with us two esteemed speakers who will be explaining us about the importance of cybersecurity, why we need it, and how corporates should protect themselves by having an adequate cyber insurance cover. The session will be for around 50 minutes. And if you have any questions during the session, I will request you to put your questions into the Q&A chat box so that I can take your questions and answer all of them, or at least the most of them. Now, with this, let me first introduce our first distinguished speaker, Mr. R Vijay from Mahindra Financial Services. Vijay is the Chief Information Security of Network Management at Mahindra Financial Services. Vijay has been an integral part of Mahindra organization since 2013. He brings along with him many years of rich experience in this field. He has worked both in India and abroad with government and private organizations in various projects and assignments. With this, let me welcome Mr. R Vijay to take on the screen.
Thanks, Swati. Good evening, everyone. It's indeed a pleasure to address you all at this wonderful hour. Cybersecurity, you all know, is a very, very interesting field, and in fact, it's one of the most upcoming field when it comes to that of IT. It is even more sought after when it comes to that of the technologies more to do with that of networking and security, or for that matter, the IT infra space is concerned. Now, coming to the kind of exposure all the organizations are currently having with respect to that of the digital footprint is really very large. That means the scale at which the organizations are exposed to the World Wide Web is very huge. That means when the surface area increases, the possibility of attacks on that particular surface area is going to increase, multifold rather to say. Think of the old days when the banking used to happen were based on normal paper media. Then probably at that time it was basically to secure it physically, whereas now it is digital. In fact, the thief is not there at the door, but he is somewhere hiding on the net. We do not even know where he is, where from he's going to attack, even try to have a intention which we do not even know. So that's the kind of mechanism it's there. Now coming to the kind of attacks, you hear so many terms and terminologies day in and day out. Something which you commonly hear is the malware. Every one of you know that there is a virus attack, probably even your personal system or anything of that kind. Like you hear about Trojans, you it's something equivalent to that of the Trojan horse, which you would have heard in the history. And then of course you have worms, so many of them. You keep on, in fact, to have the understanding about the terms and terminologies used, you need to have about 5-6 days of session. That's how the number of attacks exist, and they have their own interesting names. Next, well known amongst all is the phishing attack. Everybody says there is a phishing mail there. There is a spear phishing. It's something, a targeted attack on specific persons in the organization, or maybe a group within the organization, or it could be anything of that kind. Like it could be targeted towards your senior management. They call it as whaling. Or probably they create an equivalent of your banking page, okay, and then probably try to redirect all the incoming traffic to that particular thing and try to fish out the data. They call it as farming. Next well-known thing is ransomware. If I'm not wrong, it was 2017 and beyond. There are multiple ransomware attacks. 2017 May, if I'm precise, there are almost 3 types of attack which came in. The big rabbit, so many things, in fact, okay, the bad rabbit, sorry, okay, so many things which came up, and it's continuing day in and day out. If you happen to see an organization and if you happen to check the control system that is there existing, you will be alarmed to see so many such attacks are happening every moment. And then as I speak, my organization and other organizations are getting attacked. There are specific set of technologies being used to protect them against such attacks, either manually or with technologies which are well improvised using machine learning as well as artificial intelligence kind of thing, backed up with big data analytics. That's how exactly you are able to churn that amount of data. The kind of attack comes probably in the order of millions and billions, not in the order of a few hundreds, which were the days, age old days, wherein a single firewall would rather protect the organization. Definitely, now that's not the case. Plethora of systems, plethora of technologies need to be used. That's how it is. Another important big thing, in fact, 2018, if I'm not wrong, Mumbai, particularly being the financial hub, was attacked by what is known as denial of service attack. Organizations specifically targeted towards financial services sector, and to a certain extent the telcos, were attacked by denial of service, meaning the service will not be accessible to the right user. Somebody else will keep on pinging you to ensure that your service is not available just in time to the right set of users. It's as equivalent as business being lost. There are different variants there. You have distributed denial of services, which can happen world across at any given point of time to a given organization. These are all targeted. Then you might probably have what is known as a lot of other things, which could be happening at the application layer. You call it as cross-site scripting. You have SQL injection, the database kind of attacks rather. And another important thing which you keep on hearing time and again is the zero-day attacks. Microsoft releases a update, and then of course that get fixed, or probably a new operating system comes, or a new application comes, new version comes in, and you find that suddenly it gets attacked. That's basically because it's just in time marketing. That's the reason when the application gets developed and put across for production for public use, there might be few flaws. Maybe some are tested, some are really not tested. And the attacker, there are guys waiting for this purpose to make a big amount from that particular thing and try to attack that particular application. Big bounty is one other thing which I may have to go in a different direction though. But this is what exactly happens in the marketplace. So ultimately, they're bound to be attacked, and that's what you call as zero-day attacks. And subsequently, the fixes comes and all that stuff. Gone are the days of passwords being attacked and all that stuff, because now password almost has no meaning. You have more controls over that on top of it. So ultimately, I can keep on talking about a lot of things. The ultimate ambition here is attack surface is very high. What I talked right now is just probably 5% of what all possible attacks that could probably exist in the marketplace. The marketplace, I'm talking about the bad guys, okay? And these attacks can even be generated by script kiddies who are there sitting. You can try it out. Maybe you and me will not do that. We don't have that patience with age. Whereas the college going kid or a school kid for that matter has all the patience, use Google, get all the tools, use it in the right sequence, it can start doing certain attacks. Maybe unknowingly, but there are professionals involved in this particular thing, professionals who have knowledge as good as a postdoctoral guy sitting, teaming up together world across, doing such things day in and day out. Their intention either to bring down the reputation of an organization, get financial benefits, or it could be geopolitical nature wherein they want to down a particular country. So these are some of the things. In fact, the down the countries, lot of things, lot of examples exist. In fact, but I don't want to get into that. But it might look more political or geopolitical in nature. But that's how exactly the whole thing is all about. So now we put in, having talked about all these things, we can put in so many technologies, layered technology. There is something called the OSI layer, okay, wherein the 7 layers you can put different protection right from the bottom of it, the physical layer till that of the application layer. You can put in various controls, imbibe technologies of that particular kind. Everything is costly, everything keeps changing over the years. You need to modify them or you have to update it with the better technology. It's something like a repeat function but with an upgrade everywhere. Once you do this, the next aspect comes in. Well, is it enough? How much is enough? This question, in fact, it applies for me as well. When I talk to my CFO, he always questions, Vijay, is it sufficient? Can you tell me that these are the technologies that's sufficient to protect the organization? My answer is always no, because I know the attack surface keeps changing. The technologies are increasing. They're also, see, when I say I'm using AI and ML, I know for sure a better technology is used by the attacker. Because many of the guys, sorry to say, they are also from reputed institution who became hackers. So that's the reason we got to be very, very careful about all these things. So imbibing so many technologies does not necessarily mean you get entirely protected. You get protected sufficiently, but there is always the unknown. There is a 4 quadrant they keep talking about in cybersecurity space very often. The known knowns, which you protect. Known unknowns, to a certain extent you can protect. Unknown knowns, maybe you are protecting, we do not know. Unknown unknowns, we do not know what it is, and that is what is making everyone in the industry having sleepless nights. Assuming and presuming the technology is existing will protect that organization, and that is what exactly comes to the question of whether you will be able to transfer the risk. So that is why it becomes relevant for us to think about cyber insurance, as what exactly Swati was mentioning, and Vaishakhi is going to talk more about that particular thing. I'll leave it to Vaishakhi and Swati to take it forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vijay, for this insightful session. I'm sure the audience it would have helped really the audience in understanding what is the importance of cybersecurity and cyber insurance. There are so many threats which are there in the open market, so we need to understand it better. So let me now call our second esteemed speaker for the day, Ms. Vaishakhi Shah from Mahindra Insurance Brokers. Vaishakhi is a practice leader for liability and specialty lines at Mahindra Insurance Brokers. She's an expert in the field of liability insurance with a vast experience of over 15 years. She has designed and structured risk management strategies for liability lines. She has designed complex programs for various industries such as energy, pharma, hospitality, manufacturing, IT, auto, and infrastructure. She has handled complex claims for tech and manufacturing sector. She has worked in multinationals, broking houses like Howden and Aon. She is also an avid trainer and mentor and a regular visiting faculty in the Indian Institute Indian insurance institutes, and other educational institutes. So thank you for joining us, Ms. Vaishakhi. I will request you to take up the screen now. Thank you.
Thank you, Swati. Thank you, everyone, for joining this session. And thank you, Vijay, for such an insightful and wonderful session on what are the threats out there for any organization. So I will just continue with what Vijay mentioned. Technology has been the silver lining during the pandemic era, and we have seen such kind of hybrid models what organizations had to adopt, maybe at times from work from home or at times from office. And in this situation, what happens when employees are trying to log in from their devices through their home networks? The home networks are not so well prepared for the attack, or they are not well secured as an office setup would have been secured. So what happens that the cyber attacks have gone up like multifold in the past 2 years. Obviously cyber threat was always an exposure, and it was always a threat for organizations, but now organizations are more vulnerable to such threats because of the hybrid model what they had to adopt. And even hackers, fraudsters, they are taking disguise under the pandemic era, and they have started bombarding the organizations with so many vectors, be it compromised credentials, or be it stealing the password, or breaking into the security framework, and it can just we can just count and count. It is like never ending. And one of the major threats, as Vijay mentioned rightly, would be the ransomware, because India is third most hit country when it comes to ransomware attacks. And India, when we talk about India, we are not that well prepared like other advanced countries in terms of maybe security framework, or in terms of maybe regulations and etc. So why we are talking about data security today, and why it is so important? So what happens that any organization which runs on a technology platform and which uses data, third party data would be resting on their server under their custody control. And what will happen that a third party is interesting in the organization whilst they are sharing the data. They feel that their data is going to remain secure and confidential with that organization. But what if there is a ransomware attack, or there is a malware attack, or there is a virus, or there is a rogue employee stealing the information, and the information, credential, maybe personal identifiable information, or a payment card related information, or healthcare related information is out there in public domain, or it is compromised, then there is always a threat of identity theft. And we have seen such cases coming out in public domain where multi-million dollar losses have happened. Organizations, they've lost reputation, they've gone bankrupt, followed by a breach. Not only that, a breach within an organization can always lead to a directors and officers liability claim. So that is why, when we as a broker, when we talk about cyber liability, we do not only talk about cyber liability insurance, but we also talk about directors and officers liability insurance, because any and every breach within the organization would lead to a directors and officers liability claim. And even in India, as per Companies Act 2013, the directors and officers responsibilities are clearly defined, and they would be held responsible for such breach. So now what happens, why we are talking so much about data security and what can go wrong with an organization? So I will just share my screen here, and we will go through a presentation quickly, which will give us an idea that why there is so much need, like it is need of the hour to have proper security framework in place. Not only that, along with that, cyber liability insurance is something which is equally important. So the next slide, when I'm just moving on to next slide. So this slide gives us an idea about data protection laws around the world. So if you look at the map clearly, it clearly highlights some of the countries in red. These countries which are highlighted in red, they have the most stringent regulation, data privacy regulations in the world. So if you talk about US, Canada, or if you talk about Brazil, or if you talk about China, or if you talk about European region, we all are aware that European region, there is a data protection regulation which was introduced in 2018, which is called GDPR, which is such a stringent regulation that followed by a breach, within first 72 hours of the breach, the organization needs to immediately notify the regulators. Otherwise, there can be huge fines, penalties, which can be levied upon on the organization. Not only that, even in a company, an organization registered in India, if they have European citizens' data resting on their server, they would be obliged, or they would have to oblige with the regulatory requirements of the GDPR and other countries. So cyber exposure is a very complex world, and on top of that, the kind of vulnerabilities what we have. So as Vijay rightly mentioned about zero-day vulnerability, so there are certain groups called APT, Advanced Persistent Threat Groups. They are sitting out there and just identifying zero-day vulnerabilities to get into the company's network. And maybe there is a malware or there is a ransomware which is planted in the company's network, and they keep on, silently gathering the credentials or the information, confidential information of that organization. And when fine day, there is a big, attack which is announced by that organization. So there are multiple such organizations which we have seen, be it a Target, a retail chain, or a Home Depot, or Yahoo at the time of acquisition getting acquired by another entity. They had to announce or disclose a breach within their network, and that had resulted into their valuation downstream like anything. So data protection laws around the world are quite complex and quite stringent. India is not far behind. In 2019, there was a bill which was put up to the parliament called Data Protection Bill. Now it is going to become an act, and it is going to be called as Personal Data Protection Act. Now, what is this act all about? So when we talk about an act, Personal Data Protection Act, it has got, fines, penalties in lines with GDPR, which starts from ranging from 5 crore to 15 crore, anything between 5 crore to 15 crore, or 2% of turnover of the company to the 4% of global turnover. And there are again stringent provisions within this Data Protection Act, and an individual whose data is going to be stored on company's server, that individual would be called as data principal. And the company who is going to hold that data, or who is going to have that data under their custody control, is going to be called as data fiduciary. And then there are other provisions in the act where it talks about how do you transfer a data of an individual, whether you need to have consent beforehand from that individual, whether you want to keep that in your custody for a long time or for lifetime, then what about the consent from that individual. And even that individual, if that individual comes up stating that you need to remove my data from your custody, the organization will have to obey that and honor that request. So there are various security safeguards which are mentioned in the Protection Act, and it is going to be in lines with GDPR, where again there would be a time threshold which will be given to the organizations to report a suspicious activity or cyber incident. Not only that, when we talk about even US SEC, US SEC also has a regulation or a provision in the act where organizations who have suffered breach, they need to report it to immediately SEC, and SEC will have again right to penalize the organizations. So you can imagine an Indian registered entity having data of European citizen, having data of a foreign national, what kind of regulations he would be, or the organization would be susceptible to, and to what extent they can, safeguard their balance sheet, because their balance sheet will be open for all such incidents, right? So I'm moving on to next. When we talk about security breaches in India, as we discussed, India is not far behind. India is third most hit country, and the statistics which are mentioned here, it is out there in public domain, which we have taken from one of the renowned agencies' report, and it talks about the kind of exposure what Indian organizations have. So if you talk about data breach cost, it has gone up multifold. So maybe when we talk about 2017-18, it was in the range of 1 million or 1.2 million. Now it has gone to 4.24 million. So we have seen organizations going bankrupt, even in India, followed by a breach. So we had a live case which we as a broker we had managed, where a small time construction company having a 3 crore limit of liability, 3 or 5 crore limit of liability for cyber liability insurance. There was a ransomware attack, and they had to incur expenses for forensic investigation and notification cost. That entire limit got eroded in these expenses. And there is always a threat of legal liability which may arise out of such situation, cyber incident, and there is always a threat of regulatory fines, penalties, right? And always a business interruption threat. So this statistics gives us an idea that why India needs to ramp up, or India needs to be prepared for attacks in near future, and why organizations should start thinking seriously in terms of security frame, maybe beefing up the security framework, or having a insurance solution in place, so that there is minimal to no impact on their balance sheet. So how do you detect a breach? So when we try to discuss about cyber liability insurance, the first and foremost question which we come across as a broker would be, how do you detect a breach? So, believe you in me, whenever organizations are attacked or there is a cyber incident which takes place within the organization, mostly they will come to know, majority of the organizations, they come to know via that hacker or the fraudster or that organization who has, planted an attack in their system, or there will be a regulator, or there will be an employee, a rogue employee who has stolen the data, and the client or the customers, they will come back, asking for compensation, or telling them that your security framework is not robust because our data is out there in public domain. So there are ways and means to detect a breach. Maybe you as an organization, you would want to hire a forensic investigator the moment your IT team comes up with a suspicious activity, or report where they are able to identify suspicious activity. Then you would want to hire a forensic investigator, or you would have a preventive measure, you would hire assessment and audit services. So there are so many agencies who offer this kind of services, who would beforehand give you a live demo of to what extent your systems are vulnerable, and what you can do in order to contain or mitigate an attack, and maybe the after effects of an attack. Because post an attack, the organization suffers the most. The employee trust is gone, client trust is gone, regulators are behind them. They themselves suffer business interruption losses. So their entire ecosystem is, under threat. So there are various means to detect the breach. Now, when I'm moving on to next, this slide gives you an idea what kind of security breaches we have seen in India. So you can see that, right from hospitality business to a financial institution to a retail chain or an online platform or an aviation company or a power plant company or a pharma manufacturer, none of the organizations are safe in today's world. So there is a saying in cyber security market that, there are only two types of organizations who are out there: when they are breached and they know they are breached, when they are breached but they themselves, they don't know that there is an attack which has taken place in their domain. Right now, again, I'm moving on to next, where we talk about crypto trading. Now, till February 2022, we all were under impression that crypto trading is not allowed in India. But our finance minister has opened up that domain for us. Now, crypto, when an individual or an organization wants to invest heavily in crypto, what kind of threats or what kind of exposures they would face? So here are the live case studies or claim examples which we have come across, which is out there in public domain, where, there is a breach in the cryptocurrency platform, or an organization, they've lost it big way, or an individual, they've lost it big way when they are trying to trade in crypto. So again, introduction of crypto or digital currency is going to bring in new sorts of threats or new kind of vulnerabilities, for which again India will have to be prepared for that. So now how do you address these exposures, and to what extent we can cover it under an insurance policy? So majority of the exposure can be covered by way of a policy which is called a cyber liability insurance policy. When we talk about cyber liability insurance policy, there is a general misconception in the market or with the organizations that, even if there is a online fraud which takes place because of the organization suffers a financial loss, that would be covered under cyber liability policy. No, it doesn't work like that. So the intent or the aim of the cyber liability insurance policy is to protect an organization from data breach, that is loss of data by any means. It can be a malware attack, it can be a ransomware, it can be a virus, it can be rogue employees stealing the data, it can be bring your own devices, which is a now in the current situation, which is a very normal situation where the individuals employees are working from home, or they are remotely accessing the networks of the companies, and there is more threat to the organization. So any and every kind of breach because of which the data is lost, and there can be liabilities which can be associated with this loss of data. So what kind of covers which are available in a cyber liability insurance? For ease of understanding, we have divided into some buckets. So when we talk about crisis expenses, as we discussed, followed by a breach, or even there is a suspicious activity, the organizations will run for forensic investigation. So right from forensic investigation cost to notification expenses, so notifying your end users about this cyber breach is something which is very important. Then comes credit monitoring. If you are the organization where payment card related information is stored, and if that data is compromised, then as per the payment card industry regulation, you become liable. So there would be a credit monitoring cost which will be associated, where 24/7 call center would be hired, or agencies would be hired, who would keep on a tab or keep on supervising kind of data which is flowing in the virtual world, and to what extent the lost or compromised card data is utilized or used by the fraudsters. Then comes public relation expenses. As we discussed, there is going to be a major threat on the reputation of the company. So public relation consultant cost is again covered, where the set of consultants would come and help you at the time of such crisis. How do you come out in public domain, and how do you reach out to the regulators, and in what aspect, to what extent you can come out in public domain, and in what manner do you represent your case? Because if it is a listed company, such kind of incidents would have repercussions on the share prices of that company. Share prices would fall down, and then there would be a shareholder activism which the company would have to face, right? And the legal guidance. So when we talk about a third party data or even employees data, so Sony Inc., Sony PlayStation, these are such of the live cases which we have seen, where employees data was stolen or compromised, and there can be always a threat against the employer by an employee bringing in a claim. So legal liability is covered under the policy. So what is covered is defense cost, legal expenses, and even the compensation, which would be awarded by the court of law. Then comes the regulatory data, fines, penalties, regulatory defense cost, which is covered as we discussed. Again, regulatory fines, penalties would be followed by a condition that it has to be insurable by law of land. So if we talk about GDPR, within European region, there are so many countries who do not allow regulatory fines, penalties to be insurable. And in spite of you having an insurance policy in place, maybe the policy will not be able to help you or support you at the time of regulatory fines, penalties. So one needs to really do a thorough study of the regulatory fines, penalties which they are susceptible to, and whether the insurance policy will be able to support them or not. Then comes cyber extortion, the much talked about attack, ransomware attack. How does a ransomware attack function? The attackers, they control your central system, they take full charge of central system. Then they would raise a demand for in cryptocurrency. most of the times, we have seen that 60 to 70% of the times, the organizations, they are able to, they manage to come out clean without the encryption key, which has to be demanded or which has to come from the fraudsters or hackers. But at times, the ransomware attacks are so high, or, I would say so severe in nature, that the organizations, they are not able to come out on their own, and they end up paying ransomware to the extortionist, cyber extortionist. So whatever organization will have to pay in form of cryptocurrency will be covered under the policy in form of whatever currency you have the policy. Maybe if it is in USD, then equivalent to USD, or if it is in INR, then equivalent to INR. Then comes reconstitution cost, followed by a breach. At times, we have seen that the systems are so heavily infected that the organizations do not have any solution but to, format the system. So the data which is compromised, not compromised, we still don't know. But then, there will be a cost involved to reconstitute or revamp your data. So that cost will be covered under the policy. And for any organization, business interruption is a major cost or major threat, followed by a breach. We have seen cases where roughly up to 20-25 days, or for some number of days, the organizations are not able to run their systems in spite of having a business continuity plan or disaster recovery plan in place. So at that time, in excess of maybe there would be a waiting period of 10 to 12 hours, maybe from 8 hours to 24 hours. It ranges between 8 hours to 24 hours. So beyond this waiting period, if the organization is not able to run their business operations, and if they are suffering losses, then the loss of profit would be covered under the policy under business interruption header. So this is kind of a 360-degree protection which is provided to the companies, organizations, to safeguard their balance sheet against such cyber liability incidents or cyber incidents. Now, when I'm moving on to next, when we talk about latest trends, so as we discussed, during the pandemic era, we have seen that there is a severe or a drastic increase in the attacks, be it a cyber attack or a ransomware attack. Then there are, security related issues and regulatory fines, penalties, which have gone up drastically. Then comes to the market trends. So when we talk about, the market update, market is hardening, capacities are shrinking, and this is the right time for any organization to go for an insurance policy, because days are not far where we will see that, the insurance companies are not able to offer a higher limit for any client. So we have seen that insurance companies walking out of some of the accounts or some of the policies where they feel that the exposure is tremendous, or there is likelihood of that organization suffering a breach. So how does it work? There would be the organizations internally would have to ramp up their information security policy. They would have to train their employees. They would have to educate their employees that when there is a suspicious activity or when there is a spam mail, please do not click on that. You immediately report it to the IT team. Then there would be password protection policies. The security framework would have to be closely monitored. IT teams will have to keep on doing audit of the system, so that the moment there is a suspicious activity, they are able to highlight or alert the individuals or the organization. So as a broker, what we can do, our offerings is, we study the portfolio and we analyze the situation. We do have tied up with some of the agencies who would provide you services in terms of your exposure, what is your exposure and what can be the probable loss. Basis the agency's report, we will devise a policy. We will devise wordings at par with international standards. Not only that, one of the major threats what we have seen is supply chain management risk. When your systems are interconnected or interlinked with your suppliers or vendors who are providing you IT services or IT platform, any breach at their end would definitely have repercussions on your system. Maybe because of their fault or their system being down, you would suffer a financial loss or a business interruption loss. So we do vet the contract, we do analyze how you are connected with your vendor system, whether you should emphasize on your vendor to have a cyber liability policy in place, so that at the time of such situation you can always have a shelter under their policy. So this is all about from my end, and I really thank you all for patiently hearing out us. So Swati, over to you now.
Thank you, Vaishakhi, for such an informative session. And I would like to request now the participants, if they can put in their Q&A, we can start the Q&A session. I can see a couple of questions. Maybe we'll start with that. Yeah, so let me take the first question, which has been put by Rajneesh Kumar. What are the minimum deductibles in the cyber policies?
So Rajneesh, to be very honest, there is nothing called as minimum deductible. But we talk about Indian market. Indian market was a soft market till date, or maybe 2 years back. So we had seen, as low as 10 to 15 lakhs of deductible. But now gone are the days, and the minimum deductible which we see for a sizable organization runs between $50,000 to $100,000.
Okay, thanks, Vishak. Let me take the next question, which has been put. What kind of insurance tenure one should consider for cyber?
So cyber liability policy is an annual policy, and it has to be renewed yearly, year after year, because it is a claims-made policy. So when we say a claims-made policy, it means that your first policy inception date would become a cutoff date. Any breach which has taken place prior to this date would not be covered under the policy. So it is advisable for an organization to continuously renew the policy, so that, maybe you've started buying the policy for the first time from 1st February 2022. You come across a suspicious activity maybe in March 23. By that time, if you do not renew the policy, you lose out a chance to, claim it under the policy. So advisable to continuously renew the policy, and year on year, when we see that exposure is growing. So there are multiple factors which impact the limit of liability. There can be turnover, the kind of data which is being stored, the kind of exposure you have, the kind of organization or the nature of business what you have. So there are multiple factors, but we generally, as a broker, we normally request the clients or advise the clients to increase the limit year on year, so that when you have when you are at the peak of your business, you are covered substantially.
So let me take the next question. Extortion being a criminal offense, how insurers manages to cover or pay claim under cyber extortion?
So very good question. In fact, there is a lot of debate and discussion going on, between the insurance companies. So there are cases where, insurance companies were not allowed by the court. The court came out with verdicts that, the insurance company cannot make good the loss when it comes to ransomware attacks. So yes, there are lots of debates and discussions, but we have seen that, most of the times insurance companies do support, because insurance policy is again a legal contract, and something which is promised in the legal contract, they would have to adhere to it. So yes, there are a lot of discussions. Maybe there are at times the insurance companies or the insured organizations, they do face challenges from getting it covered under the insurance policy. But as long as you go hand in hand right from day one, so at times we have seen that the insured organization, they want to keep it under the wrap, and they do not inform the insurance company. They go ahead and they make the payment to the extortionist, then they want to cover it under the policy, then it doesn't happen. But yes, it is a criminal offense. But since the company in act IRDA or across across the globe, the insurance act allows it to be covered under the policy, it would be covered under the policy.
Okay, thanks, Vaishakhi. Next question is, someone is asking, do small organizations need cyber insurance, or it's more relevant for the large size organizations?
So it is relevant for any size of organization. In fact, now the insurance companies have come up with individual cyber as well. So we as an individuals also need to have a cyber liability policy in place, because not a single person or not a single organization is safeguarded from such attacks.
So one more question on what is the average cost of a single data with respect to Indian market? And further is what should be the minimum sum insured for an Indian entity so as to be at par with the contemporary attack?
So again, there would be multiple factors. So when we look at the turnover, or when we look at a startup organization who doesn't have much of an exposure in terms of data, or who doesn't have much of an exposure for in terms of globalization, maybe they are confined to India territory. They have the data which is resting on their server, confined to the Indian individuals or Indian corporations. Then yes, we can look at a $1 million or a $2 million cover, but there is no scientific thumb rule for anyone to decide the kind of limit they should have. So I'll give you an example. Target Corporation in 2014, they suffered an attack at the point of sale. They are a retail chain, and they more than 200 stores across US. They suffered a malware attack, and more than 70 million users' data was stolen. Out of that, 40 million users' data was compromised. When we say compromised, it was actually misused by the fraudsters. And now at that point in time, they have a $100 million policy in place. When we talk about 2014, $100 million was a big limit for any organization. But the entire limit got eroded in only forensic investigation and notification expenses and regulatory fines penalties. And there were more than $100 million lawsuits filed against them. So there is no such thumb rule.
Okay. So maybe Vijay, this question maybe you can answer. During WFH, we are mainly using Wi-Fi network, and we have several data in our system which we must secure related to our business. Please suggest how to secure our home Wi-Fi network against unauthorized access.
Okay, there are two parts here. One is if in case you're going to talk in terms of your access to the organization, there are mechanisms which is something like a virtual desktop kind of an interface, wherein what you can do, be it for that matter, you're using your own device, personal device, or the company owned device, it goes through a secure pipe, a secure tunnel is being created. So this secure tunnel will ensure that you are able to access the data at the far end, that is at the enterprise level, and you will be able to work on that particular data without even bringing the data in. This probably is a solution used for bring your own device, wherein whatever data is existing on the organizational systems or servers for that matter will not even have a component through cut and paste or any other mode for that matter into the personal device. This is one way of doing that. The other one is to create a secure tunnel. That is for company owned devices. Probably you create a secure tunnel with the respect to that of your system and that of the far end. So even if in case your system is getting compromised, okay, so that particular thing will not even get established, because there is a session mechanism that is being protocol handshake, which will ensure that you will not be able to connect at all, or during that particular phase when the session has been established, there is a compromise, it will cut off. So that way it is more secure. This is one part of the thing. Okay, what if I am using that particular network for accessing anything, internet or anything for that matter from my own device, nothing to do with that of the personal systems for that matter? Use the right set of tools. You have to use the most secure Wi-Fi router and set it right. Most important thing, anything, the biggest problem in this entire world is getting things configured rightly. If you are not equipped, if you are not capable enough to do that configurations, use the expert who is reliable again. Because if you are using an external guy and he himself is a kind of an hacker, he can configure in such a way that he will be able to create a coveted channel and start seeing what exactly you are doing. So you got to be very careful in that particular mechanism and then do it. There are professionals who are there available in the market who will be able to provide that particular service, or probably from the OEM, you should be able to get that service in a better way.
Thanks, Vijay. I think that will help. Vaishakhi, again, one question is on, someone is asking, please elaborate the claim process under the ransom attack in India.
I'm sorry. So when it comes to claim process, and especially for ransomware attacks, when the company is under a ransomware attack, what will happen? They will not be able to, run their day-to-day task, and they will either have to, pay the ransomware to the extortionist, or they will have to try to come out clean. So as I mentioned, we have seen that 70 to 80% of the organizations are able to come out clean. But at the time of such ransomware attack, if your policy has a provision to offer you some kind of emergency cost, where without informing the insurance company, you are going ahead, you are trying to appoint a forensic investigator, or you are trying to find out some specialist who can come to your rescue, or if you are able to find out an informer who would come and give you a heads up before such attack is going to happen. So there is something called emergency cost. That provision has to be bought in the insurance policy for any organization to incur cost without consent of the insurance company. Once you are able to do that, then you go back to the insurance company, you inform them about this attack. They will immediately come to your rescue. Most of the insurance companies have empaneled forensic investigators, so you can definitely go with them, or you can select any of your choice, and you have to just inform the insurance company that this is going to be the charges levied by that forensic investigator. And then you file an FIR, that is, in the cyber cell. So these are some of the basic parameters which one needs to be considered at the time of claim of ransomware attack. It is not only applicable to ransomware attack. Any type of cyber attack, it becomes very difficult for an organization to understand how to go about it. So beforehand, you need to properly, maybe you can do a dry run, or there are agencies who will come to your help, or who will assist you in order to analyze how well you are prepared for an attack. I hope this answers the question.
Okay. So in relation to that only, there was one question was, what is the response time to report to the insurance when a breach occurs?
So there is no such hard and fast rule. If you look at the policies do not say that, within 72 hours or within 48 hours of the breach, you need to intimate the insurance companies. But as a prudent insured, you would like to immediately notify the insurance company. Now, again, there are, issues at the time of a cyber incident. Maybe within the IT team, someone is aware of a suspicious activity, but by the time they report to the CISO, CTO, or the IT head, there is a time lag of maybe 14-15 days, because they don't know that there is such policy which is in existence and which has been purchased by the organization. So in the policy, there has to be a provision called control group clause, which will take care of such issues. Maybe within IT team, someone is aware of such suspicious activity. By the time the CISO, CTO, or the CFO, they come to know, once they come to know, then only it becomes notifiable to the insurance company. And most of the times, malware or ransomware attacks, they are not as if, someone has, the fraudster has planted on your system and it has acted immediately. No, they sit quietly in the system, your domain, they keep on sitting quietly, they gather the information, and at the right time, they, come up with an attack. So if you look at Cosmos Bank scenario, the same thing happened. Over a weekend it happened. It's not that over a weekend attackers got into the system. No, they were there in the system, ideally sitting for number of days, and at the right time they planned this attack. So advisable to form a control group, have that provision in the policy, so that at the time of claim, the claim doesn't get into dispute because of the delayed notification.
Thanks, Vaishakhi. Vaishakhi, one more question is, can we put out of court settlement clause in the policy wording?
Yeah, so that is something which is not possible to put in the policy in black and white, but the insurance companies do agree for out of court settlement, and they would happily assist you when you want to go for a mediation or out of court settlement.
Okay. So it's one question which is like he's saying, I'm a layman and I want to understand what is the basic question is what is insured actually in the cyber insurance.
So what is insured is the exposure which you as an organization you carry in terms of the data. So now when you are having data, third party data in your system, let's say you are a financial institution, you have not only personal identifiable information, but you have payment card related information as well. Just imagine that data being compromised, misused by the fraudsters, and identity theft, which is a major theft or major exposure when it comes to personally identifiable information. An individual's identity can be cloned, and obviously in India we do not have that much critical infrastructure or in terms of criticality when it comes to identity. We happily share our PAN card, Aadhaar card details with everybody. But in US and other countries, they have something called social security number, and mediclaim is something which is very expensive over there. So what happens? An individual's identity is compromised. Someone clones and clones the mediclaim card, or goes and takes benefits under the social security number, then it is a major threat for the organization. Not only that, as we discussed, regulations across the globe are becoming stringent. Everyone is talking about data privacy, and the organization who is the custodian of such data, they would be held liable and responsible for any type of compromise. So what is ensured here is the exposure to organization arising from a data theft. It can be a business interruption to the organization. It can be the expenses which that organization will have to incur for forensic investigation or notification or regulatory fines, penalties. It can be legal liability that may arise against the organization, followed by a breach.
So is the reputational risk also is covered in this?
So reputational risk itself is not covered. What is covered is, public relation expenses cover. So the expenses which an organization will have to incur in hiring public relation consultant to see to it that the impact of the breach is, contained or mitigated on the reputation or goodwill of the company.
Now let me move to the next question is on, cyber being a specialized line of business, how well the Indian insurers are ready to offer competitive terms to the clients? That's one question. Is there too much dependence on the reinsurer? And considering the recent quantum of the attacks, where do you see average cost of the premium in percentage terms going up at the near future in the Indian market?
So, yes, in cyber liability, when we started off with cyber liability in 2013-14, it was relatively new subject and new insurance for Indian market. So the Indian insurers, again, there were very few selective insurance companies who were able to, offer cover for cyber liability insurance. So at that time, India was a soft market. India was a safe market when it came to data breach and compromise. So the insurance companies were very aggressive, and we were getting backdated retro and whatnot, what all sort of covers we used to get under the policy. Come 2016, 2017, as Vijay mentioned, 2017 was the year where we saw massive ransomware attacks happening in India. Slowly, the market started hardening, and dependence on, obviously, cyber liability was always a reinsurance driven market, but the reinsurers had given authority to Indian insurers in terms of pricing and coverage. Slowly, come 2019, we saw that reinsurers started pulling off that authority. They started becoming stringent. They started curtailing down on some of the coverage or some of the offering. Come 2021, in this last 2 years, we have seen massive change in cyber insurance offering in Indian market. Dependence on reinsurers have increased. The market has hardened, and we have seen the premiums going up currently from anywhere between 20% to 40%.
Okay. So this question is, how long does it take a cybersecurity company to process a claim? I mean, I think the insurance company must have.
Right. So if you have proper, investigation, if you as an organization, if you are able to support or cooperate with the insurance company, we have seen that, some of the smaller losses, or when it is not a very major event and where it is not, impacted the organization heavily, we have seen the claims getting settled within as fast as within 4 or 5 months.
Okay.
But if it is a major breach and your business operations are completely compromised or stopped, and you are not able to run your business for some number of days, then it takes a bit longer time for the insurance company also to ascertain the liability, because by the time you are trying to establish your business operations, your bill is ticking. You are still incurring forensic investigation, notification cost, public relation expenses, right? So it is, when it comes to, so the to for in simpler terms, cyber liability policy can be divided into two buckets. One is first party cost, which is on a reimbursement basis, which you as an organization, you are going to incur some expenses, you are going to get reimbursed by the insurance company. And the other part is legal liability, which is unknown. It can be infinite. So there you cannot ascertain that, okay, today there is a breach, there is no legal liability claim which has arisen, so I'm safe. No, it can arise after 5 months, 6 months as well.
Okay. Next question is, how can we fix up the policy limit? And if an employee is engaged in the cyber attack, will this fall into a cyber liability policy or the crime policy?
So rogue employees stealing the data and, maybe conniving with third party or passing on the confidential information to competitors and all, we have seen a lot of cases coming out in this particular, header. And more than 10 to 15% of the losses across the globe in cyber liability policy arise from rogue employees stealing the data. So yes, any type of breach or compromise to data would be covered. It can be a human error. It can be an intentional malified act by the employee that will be covered under the policy. And the first question, Swati, I didn't get what you were saying.
It was on how can we fix up the policy limit?
Yeah, so that we discussed earlier also, right? That it is very difficult for the broker or the organization to come up with a conclusive, conclusion that this is going to be the right limit or right set of insurance for me. So if the organization is having more turnover and larger operations, they are spread across the globe, advisable to have policy limit somewhere between 15 to 20 million dollar, because the regulations across the globe are applicable to you. But if it is India exposure, then you can look at somewhere between 2 million to 5 million.
Okay. Next question is, whose duty it is to appoint a forensic experts when claim is reported? Is it an insurance company or a broker, or is the insured? Who has to do that? And how much maximum cost allowed to insured for appointing a forensic experts when claim is reported?
Thank you, Swati. So forensic investigation cost can run into millions of dollars, as we have already discussed. So it all depends on the your policy structure, the way policy is structured. If your policy limit is say $5 million, and if your forensic investigation cost is only allowed, you are allowed to incur forensic investigation cost only up to 10% of the $5 million limit, then obviously you cannot do anything. So as a broker, we see to it that some of the such basic covers are offered up to policy limit, so that you are buying a $5 million limit, and if you have to incur $3 million in forensic investigation cost, you can do that very well, depending on the structure of the policy, the way policy is devised. Coming to the next question, who will appoint forensic investigator? So as we discussed earlier also, insurance companies have empaneled forensic investigators, but they do not insist on the insured organization that you have to go to forensic investigators of our choice. It is always advisable to go as per their choice, because they are equipped to manage insurance claims. They are well versed with the policy wordings, and when a XYZ insurance company has appointed forensic investigator, that forensic investigator exactly knows how to go about it, because that insurance company has been always taking help from that forensic investigator, but that doesn't stop insured organization from hiring other agency as well, with due approval or consent from the insurance company.
Okay. So one more question is on under business interruption coverage, is the salaries of employees paid for interruption period is covered? Or even if there is a loss, there is no loss of revenue?
So under business interruption loss cover, what is covered is loss of profit suffered by the organization for the period of downtime, and any additional charges which they, or additional expenses in hiring additional manpower, or hiring alternate accommodation. All these additional expenses would be covered, but the standing charges would never be covered under the business interruption loss. That is, standing charges are your current electricity bills or your employees' salary and all, that will never be covered under business interruption losses.
Okay. Then we can take a last question on, for financial institutions, can we cover fidelity under the cyber policy?
I did not get the question, properly, because fidelity is something a completely different domain when we talk about. When we talk about fidelity can be, where a fraudster or a rogue employee steals the money, or, there is a fund transfer fraud which takes place because of a rogue employee. So when we talk about fidelity, yes, the cyber liability policy, as we discussed, it doesn't bar from triggering the policy for a rogue employee who has stolen the information, right? But when we talk about a fidelity guarantee policy, it is a completely different cover. It revolves around hard cash and money and all. So both are completely different covers, or both have different intent under the policy. But yes, an employee with a malified intention, if he or she steals, or the data is compromised because of them, then the policy would definitely pick up the loss.
Thanks, Vaishakhi, and thanks, Vijay. I think we have covered most of the information. So I think we have answered also lots of questions. So once again, thank you, Vaishakhi and Vijay, for this insightful session. It was great to hear from both of you. And I will definitely like to thank all the participants also for their active participation and asking the questions. I think it was really a good exercise. I think we can connect again for the bill. If you want to contact us, you can contact us on the mentioned toll-free number and the email. And we will definitely look forward to having many more sessions with you. Thank you so much.